I was one of the first people to call the AR5000 a great headphone. And I'm extremely happy to say that I think they've done it again with their SR7000, the closed back version. This right here is a shockingly good closed back headphone in a way that I was not expecting. They seem to have a very different approach to this headphone than the open back. And it's very, very good, but in a very different way. We'll talk about all that in a second. First off though, what is basically the same is the build. In fact, this is literally as close as you could get as making a closed back version of an open back headphone as far as build goes. It fits exactly the same. The only subtle differences are this is closed, different color, and slightly different pads, but it wears the same, it weighs close to the same, it's as comfortable, and I think I actually like this build better. I think it just looks a little bit more premium to me, a little bit higher end. Now for that extra money, you don't get a lot as far as build goes, except for an extra carry case that didn't come with the open back version. Compared to some competitors, let's say the DT 1770 Pro Mark II, the build quality isn't as nice, but I do find the comfort to be a little bit better. And I don't really have an issue with the build quality of this. I think it could be a little bit nicer if you used more metal in more places, but I think it's actually a pretty solid build overall to begin with. So even though it could be nicer, I think it meets a nice threshold of being nice enough. That being said, this sees a doubling of price tag from about $300 to $600 for this. Now, when I saw that the price is double here, my first thought was, why? Like, why would it be that much? And I think that the truth is that for the sound quality that this offers and the build quality and the mixture of the two, this actually has the market cornered in a really interesting way, even at $600. See, this headphone, surprisingly, is an extraordinarily neutral headphone that I would actually consider to be for professionals. The AR5000, I think, was dead set for audiophiles, and I think that's exactly who it was made for, and they nailed that. But it's not what I would consider to be a professional headphone. This is a little bit less for audiophiles unless they're seeking that more neutral professional approach, but it is very much for professionals. Treble for me is a make or break area for a closed back headphone, and it's often the breaking point. They are usually too bright or muffled. This is dead center. It hits the right areas for treble to sound sparkly and clear and coherent and super detailed, but it's not a harsh headphone. And so right away, I see an absolute killing of other brands like Fostex for closed back headphones, where this treble performance is actually better than any Fostex I've heard, regardless of price. And that puts it, in my opinion, just ahead of Fostex right off the rip as Aune's first closed back headphone, which is wild. And as I go through this review, you'll actually see that I think that this kind of murders a few brands' closed back line, because this is just better. And not just one area, but in many. Now, it kind of depends on what you want from treble. Some audiophiles might prefer a bit sparklier of a treble response, but I think that the way it's delivering makes it very obvious when you make any tuning changes on an actual audio recording. So if you boost the treble, this can really shine and shimmer if it's highlighted, but it also will never come across overly harsh like some Bear Dynamics can, like the 1770 Pro can be a bit harsh, and this never really does that. It also avoids entirely the area of sibilance. So if you take a track like Life Worth Living from Laurel, which is a bit too bright of a mix, in my opinion, it's definitely on the brighter side. On a bright headphone, this comes across like murderous to your ears. But on this headphone, it's almost easy going. Like, it's very audible. It's clear what they intended it to sound like without it being offensive auditorily to you. So they do a really good job of keeping the high end sparkly and saturated enough, but without overdoing it too much. Now the mid-range, I just don't understand. Like, this is the type of mid-range that I would have expected Sennheiser to create for their closed back line, but they've never been able to achieve. It's a mid-range that is actually better than any closed back headphone that Sennheiser makes. And they're a brand that is just famous for mid-range. The entire HC6 series is some of the best mid-range that exists on any headphone. And their closed back versions like the 620S, they're good. They're just not this good. This has such a saturated sounding vocalist in such a colorful but neutral way. Like, it's very fair, it's very honest, but it's super enjoyable. All the vocalists come across with weight and depth and isolation that I would look for in more open back headphones. But this is coming across in such a fair and honest and sensitive way that it's just highly impressive. And when I mean sensitive, I mean when you're mixing professionally, when you're making small, subtle adjustments to a voice with either an equalizer or reverb or anything at all. Those changes are so obvious on this headphone that it really sticks it into that professional realm for me. Now, it does seem that some other hi-fi headphones will be a bit brighter in the top end of vocals, and I think for audiophiles that might be a little bit more appealing because it may come across a bit more detailed than this in that specific area. And I think that this undershoots upper mid-range a tiny bit compared to like what would be considered perfectly referenced. But I think in a closed back headphone, being as sensitive as this actually really works out. This actually allows you to hear the integrity of the recording without it physically being too bright or too whatever for your ears, if that makes any sense. Like you can hear the information without necessarily feeling the information. And an audiophile headphone might be better at the feeling, but less at the hearing, if that makes any sense. And through treble, mid-range, and bass, the neutrality line is just dead center. Like if you're looking for an example of a neutral, especially a neutral closed back headphone, this is definitely it. It's very clearly neutral in a way that very, very, very few headphones are. The mid-range is also wholeheartedly better than anything I've heard from Beyerdynamics closed series and anything I've heard from Sennheiser's closed series, which are huge players in the closed back space. A lot of closed back headphones come from them. I prefer this mid-range over any of theirs. Now bass. This is going to be the breaking point for a lot of people. When I say that this headphone is neutral, unfortunately, that includes the bass response. And the bass is going to come across in a way where you hear everything, but you're not really feeling the impact of things as greatly as some people would prefer. In fact, even Aune's AR5000, the open back headphone, is better at bass, in my opinion. It maybe isn't as honest and as true to the recording as the SR7000, but it's more enjoyable. And so if you're into it for enjoyment, I would actually personally stick with the cheaper AR5000, which I'm really glad is half the price. But if you're into that super neutral honesty for bass, this carries more of that weight. This is sort of equivalent to the HD600 would be the SR7000 and the HD6XX would be the AR5000, right? It's a bit more bass, it's a bit warmer overall. It's a bit more of a enjoyable take, but maybe not necessarily as neutral. For sound staging and imaging, I'm also going to loop in a factor that is really a potential problem for closed back headphones specifically, which is sort of decay or resonance in the cup. Sound staging and imaging is very, very good. It's very fair. It's super accurate in terms of position. It's not ultra wide like you can get on some really crazy closed back headphones like the SJY Carbon has ridiculous sound staging width. This is not quite like that, but it does have a nice forward shooting from its kind of tilted drivers that it has internally. And that does actually work. You kind of hear it more kind of like right on the bridge of your nose or like kind of behind your eyes and not really in the center of your head. And so it does that forward projection for closed back pretty well. Now, when it comes to cup resonance, there are a lot of ways to tackle this. Some people overly dampen their cups. Some people don't care. And actually some of my favorite headphones like the ZMF Bokeh use cup resonance to its advantage to sound pleasing, though not very accurate. This uses something that they call a dragon scale, which is like an acoustic prism kind of resonance eliminator or, a diffuser of sorts. And I don't really care what it's called. It works well. And so the reflective properties of this headphone aren't very distracting, which is nice, but they also didn't go overboard and do something where you reduce the reflections by over dampening stuff on the back end. That can be equally bad, and this doesn't do that either, which is great to see. I don't know who exactly is developing these headphones for them, if it's a team or just an individual, but they definitely have some experience and probably deserve a raise. So real quick versus some other headphones. Another headphone in this price category that I like quite a bit is the Focal Azurus. That has really good bass, but it's not really gonna carry the integrity of the mid-range that the SR7000 has. And in terms of neutrality, I would definitely pick the SR7000. For professional work, I would pick the SR7000. For fun, I might pick the Azurus, but if I could only have one, I think I'm leaning towards the SR7000. Versus headphones like the Noir X, I think that's also a very good neutral headphone, but I actually think that's a bit more V-shaped and a bit brighter on the treble than I actually prefer. I actually like the SR7000 a little bit more personally, though it's not going to sound quite as detailed and not quite as bassy as the Noir X. So pick your poison there, but I think for its curve, I like the SR7000 a bit more. Versus DT1770 Pro Mark II, Outside of build quality, I prefer almost every aspect unless you are gaming. If you are doing a lot of gaming, I think the 1770 Pro 2 is one of the better closed back headphones you can possibly get for gaming. But as far as being a professional headphone, SR7000 again. And then versus Sennheiser's entire closed back lineup, there is not a Sennheiser closed back I like over this. Period. There are a couple closebacks like the ZMF Bokeh that I personally like a little bit more, and the SJY Horizon, which I consider to be technically better in a lot of different areas, but also costs about $400 more than this. And I would pick those two headphones over the SR7000. But given that this is the first attempt at a closeback headphone, and it's already probably my top 3, top 5 headphones for closebacks, period, that's insane. So for my conclusion, this is a technically very good headphone. When it comes to personal preference though, your personal preference is really going to dictate whether or not you like this. If you like a lot of bass from your closed headphones, this isn't your headphone. If you like a really bright tuning or a really wide soundstage for your headphones, this also isn't going to be your headphone. This is for someone who wants a good middle ground headphone that is good in every capacity, has maybe a slight emphasis on the mid-range, and is capable of performing without anything that I would consider to be a flaw. This is definitely one of those headphones where I think people should absolutely acknowledge their technical capability here and their technical achievement here, but maybe not aligning with everybody's personal preference. It's one of those tunings where it is so good at what it does, but that's not exactly what people are always looking for. So even though I would love to see this headphone at $300 right alongside the AR5000, I think that the asking price is more than fair if you're a professional looking for a neutral closeback headphone. So great job, Aune. Peace.